Today's video is all about helping you further understand your ACEs score, some places where the ACEs score are underestimating and not identifying potential traumas, and also help us understand the impact of ACEs across our lifetime. How do these adverse experiences affect our lives, our mental and physical health? And lastly, we're just going to talk very quickly about the impact of ACEs if you might also be autistic. As you know, this is also a special interest on this channel, and so I'm going to be weaving in what I call really traumatism, not my original word, but trauma, autism, and autism and ADHD in places where I feel like I can be helpful. So let's quickly talk, though, about really what is the impact of ACEs, and then we'll talk about the underestimation, and then we'll talk about autism, okay? So at the core, we know that these repeated experiences across childhood can have biological impacts. And what is that? Why is that? That is because the stress response, part of our body's fight or flight response to fear, to danger, to survival being a possibility, requires that we get this flood of neurochemicals to make our muscles stronger, to help us fight or flight, fight or flee a situation, to help us assess what's happening. And when that flood happens again and again and again, it becomes really a flood of toxic stress and toxic stress chemicals at the core. And so this fight or flight system affects every part of not just survival, but leaves lingering effects on things like our immune system, our organs, and all of the parts of our mental and physical, really, health and well-being. So we see that with higher elevated scores of ACEs, we have higher risks of heart disease, 3 times higher risks of lung cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure, and certainly mental illness. It also affects things like our behavioral choices, our use of substances, how much we are more likely to do that, smoking, things like early pregnancy and well-being of the mother, as I said earlier, maternal mental health, difficulty navigating relationships, whether or not we're likely to even finish high school or go to college, things like poverty and breaking cycles of poverty. So all of those things are impacted by the amount of experiences that our bodies and minds and really little souls are awash. I don't mean in the religious way. I mean like our beings are awash in trauma and toxic stress again and again and again when we have an activated experience of ACEs type events and scores. Now, we talked about the questions in the last video, but are there some things that the ACEs leave out? Absolutely. And so what are those? Let's talk briefly about those. So there have been some expanded, what we call scales, some expanded tests and assessments and ways to enhance the understanding of the core questions of those ACEs questions in the questionnaire. But the thing is, those questions leave out things like community level trauma, meaning living in an unsafe environment, in a dangerous neighborhood, being exposed to violence perhaps at your school or in your surrounding areas. How things like not having good friends or any friends or friendship traumas or being rejected by peers and or being bullied by others can affect us. These ACEs scores aren't talking about things like discrimination based on race and ethnicity, on your sexuality, how you identify, all of the things, the way you express yourself, all of those can be sources of more trauma, more persecution, more harm. And then certainly things like socioeconomic factors, not having a safe place or anywhere to live, going through periods of financial duress and distress and economic hardship. So many places in our families, in our communities, in our world that the original ACEs questions don't identify. But we know that can create both big T, big PTSD, single event traumas, and little t, which are not little traumas, but often repeated relational traumas at the hands of family, coaches, teachers, whoever, most often in our own homes. And so I wanted to also share But if you are autistic, there's some additional areas. And don't forget, some newer research is identifying that those who are autistic are actually more likely to develop PTSD to things that we might consider not to be traumatic or to be mild stressors. And so what I just wanted to share with you really quickly is that autistic people report that in addition to their own sort of experiences with ACEs, which include things like, losing a loved one, emotional abuse, physical wounding and harm, bullying, and what's called other, autistic people also identified these 3 experiences in terms of a recent study I'll link down below. Number 1, feeling trapped. And I talk about this no matter whether you're autistic or not. Feeling trapped, especially when you had no way out in childhood or any relationship, is a massive trigger. And many people, in my experience, either become over responders to that, to being trapped, or kind of freeze and shut down and don't know how to get out of it and often collapse. But being trapped due to physical or emotional restraints in therapeutic environments, in schools, the loss of autonomy and decision-making, and the loss of opportunity and self-determination can be traumatic for anyone, but specifically in this study for autistic people. Number 2, being socially excluded, including isolation, socially bullying, alienation, stigma, discrimination, and betrayal, another big source of trauma. And lastly, what the autistic research talks about is called traumatic incongruities. These are experiences that stem from inhospitable environments, including sensory experiences, overwhelming transitions and changes. Don't forget, for many neurodivergent people, transitions are difficult, and the chronic stress of needing to predict and decipher social situations, which I would really encapsulate as part of that thing I talk so much about, which is hypervigilance, needing to read yourself, the room, the environment, hovering over yourself, really before, during, and after social situations. So obviously it's going to depend on whether you are high masking or not in terms of how you might integrate these experiences. But regardless of where you are, even if you are unable to verbalize it, there's no doubt that these things are traumatic. And in fact, in many of this research, we're talking about higher needs autistic individuals. But all of this, I think, can be applied in different ways. So that is the heart of, I believe, how adverse childhood experiences affect us, what often gets left out, and what to keep in mind to start to unpack if you might be autistic or neurodivergent, ADHD, have trauma, all of those. You might start to look at other places outside of an ACEs assessment where you might need, processing, trauma support, skills, tools, and healing. So that's it for today. Please have a beautiful and lovely day and take really good care of yourselves. And I will see you tomorrow. I'm going to start talking more too about other pop culture stuff too, but right now we're just kind of doing that therapy starter pack stuff. So I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.